from the future, from today, I'm going to take you back a bit of nostalgia to start with. The wonders of the web. The web has been around for like 3 decades, and I think that we've seen a lot of transition in how we position our brands on the web. In the 90s, the web was a novelty, and in order to be remarkable, as was mentioned before, you just had to have your logo on there or your address on there. It was a business card, and if you had a lot of time and if you had a lot of resource, you maybe even added your brochure on the web. And we've seen the web, or the role of the website, evolve through the years. It became a digital content hub. Companies started to add more and more content, and people started to consume more content on the web. Until the socials arrived, the Googles, the Instagrams, the Facebook. Suddenly your website was not the only point of interaction online. People started interacting via different channels. And your website had to behave as like a node in between these new destinations. And the last shifts we've seen is that people are starting to shift back to these websites, telling their stories on these websites. And who knows what's gonna be happening tomorrow. And I think with all the AIs and LLMs we have been talking about today, a lot will definitely change with our websites. But there's one thing I believe that won't change, and that is that your website is a touch point. It's a moment you have with your customer. It's a moment of interaction, just like your socials, your stores, in the shopping streets, the unboxing of your products. These are all moments that we have all been creating for our customers. Now, here's a harsh truth. 99% of these moments will ultimately be forgotten. And not because they were not important or they did not work. It was because they did not connect. They did not linger. They did not resonate. Because people don't forget, people don't remember what worked. They actually forget it. They remember what moved them. Which brings me to, what if the real impact of CX and marketing and connecting with the customer is not just what it does on a functional level, but how it's ultimately remembered? And I would in fact argue that brands are nothing more than memories in the minds of people. And this is how that will work. So you have a brand, and a brand, it sets the tone. It sets a certain expectation of what the experience is about to be. And I usually give like an example of standing in front of a McDonald's or standing in front of a 3-star restaurant. Just by looking at the building, a different expectation is framed. And then you have the experience itself, and the experience with the brands, the unboxing, looking at the store, being served, using the product. That's what is actually creating the brand memories. And that's how a brand is conceived in the minds of people through these brand memories. And that's a symbiosis we're all playing. Now, I'm going to take it a step further. I would also argue that the relationship between people is no more than a set of memories. I was once at a lecture of a Buddhist monk, and in his lecture, he was explaining the concept of a relationship to his pupils. And at a certain moment, he got up to the whiteboard and he started drawing a diagram of what most people would draw when they think of a relationship. And that's 2 people with a big fat arrow in between. And then he said that it's actually a complete misinterpretation of a relationship between people. Because that big fat arrow in the middle is not there. Not in reality, not virtually. There is no mystic force that creates that relationship. And he raised the arrow and he made this drawing. And he said the relationship is purely perceptional. It's actually just based in the minds of these people. And it's actually based on memories of each other. That's what a relationship is about. And he added also that when he would erase the minds of these 2 people, the relationship would cease to exist. Talking about memories, I'm pretty sure most of you will know this person, and if you don't know him, you should definitely get to know him. Unfortunately, he passed away last year. His name is Daniel Kahneman. He did some groundbreaking groundbreaking work on the psychology and how the brains of humans work, the experiencing self, the remembering self. And one of the concepts he came up with, or he identified, was the peak-end rule. And the peak-end rule is very simple. People remember experiences in peaks and in endings. Let me make that tangible for you. Remember when you were a kid and your parents used to take you to the dentist. Not the most fun experience, but at the end of the visit, suddenly the dentist came over with a box, opened the box, and it was a box full of toys. Now you might think, okay, dentists make a fair amount of money, they want to share some, maybe they're just generous people. But no, this box was placed there by behavioral designers because they understood the peak-end rule. And next time your mom or your dad would ask you to go to the dentist, this would be a memory that you would recollect, and it would be easier to come along because that's what you remember. You don't remember the drills, you remember the ending. Let's take another example. Fine dining. Chefs put a disproportionate amount of effort in the desserts because of the peak-end rule. So this is actually not a real carrot, it's a chef creation, looks like a carrot, but it's actually the dessert. Now, ironically, this also works the other way around. A great experience with a bad ending becomes a bad memory. And this is an example I got myself from Daniel Kahneman. And he mentioned that there was this guy and he was planning to listen to music. So he put a vinyl on his vinyl player, put his headphones on, got relaxed into the sofa and got carried away by beautiful music. But at the end of the recording, the needle skipped and there was a dreadful screeching sound. And he said it ruins the entire experience. But of course, by now you know it did not ruin the experience, but it did ruin the memory of that experience. And the memory was all that he could keep. Now, talking about memories, the fact that they have the power to forge relationships between people and brands, and even between two people, it got me thinking. What if we stopped designing for experiences, but started designing for memories? Because memories have the power that we need in order to create that relationship with our customers. And that's my topic of today, and it's called MX, and it's our proprietary way to actively work on memories. It's a new way of thinking, and you can compare it to CX or UX, but our focus is purely on, okay, how can we increase the chances of creating positive memories that ultimately create the bond with our customers. And there's two aspects that are really different towards traditional thinking, and I'm going to elaborate a bit on them. First, you want to make sure that your experience is meaningful, because if something moves you, you will remember. So you will try to connect on an emotional level, because emotions, they connect. And I'm not talking about making people happy or about sadness. It's about connecting towards intrinsic motivations, underlying desires, why people connect with certain people or certain brands. And let me make that tangible with an example. This is the logo of Base. And Base is a top telco player in Belgium. And we've been working with Base for 13 years. We've built their first app, and we're now, I think, on version 5 of the new app. It started more as a gimmick, where you could just see some data. Today, it's the core of their customer relationship, the mobile app. And Base promises control to their customers. That's what they promise in their marketing messaging. That's what they promise with their products. We offer you control. And within control, Base has certain features. So think about setting limits to your data, setting limits to your SMSs back in the days, blocking certain services, everything that provides you with control. Now, control is not an intrinsic motivation of people. It's actually an answer to an underlying desire. And that underlying desire is security. I need peace of mind. I want to feel safe. And When you start thinking from that point of view, you come up with different types of experiences. This is, for instance, one thing that we created, and I'm going to show in the next slide what it feels like. But I always like to show these next to each other, because on the left side you have like a functional way of approaching controls. On the right side, and on the left side you have an experience that started from that need for security. And actually, from what we've learned from talking to customers, they chose Base because Base promised them to avoid unpleasant surprises. They don't need control. They just don't want a bill that gives them a bill shock at the end of the month. So by creating these kind of meaningful experiences, we introduced friction. And it took a lot of courage from the internal teams to get this implemented, because this was a flow that took about half a minute. While if you were quick on your feet, the settings were 5 seconds. But because it started from this meaningful connection, it actually worked. People started doing this, and more people started setting limits. By the way, I'm not going to go all in depth here, but our business insights was that people who set their limits have less bill shock, less churn, and less overload to the support centers, because everyone that has bill shock, first thing they do is call and say, what the hell happened here? So this was actually driven by a business insight and by a psychological underlying desire. Now, if you look at the world, as a brand, you cannot play on all intrinsic motivations, but we identified 9. And Base is playing on security on the left. We usually advise people to say, okay, pick 1 or 2 you want to focus on and give them a place in how you communicate and how you build your experiences. And funny enough, this morning, I think in the first keynote from the Financial Times, at a certain point, there was an image of people carrying around the Financial Times, and it was about showing off intelligence. And that's about this theme. That's about showing the world that you have prestige, you're confident. That's also, by the way, why BMW sells cars, because we can all drive a car from A to B. That's the functional need, but you buy a BMW because they promise you that it will make you feel more confident. Who knows Citizen M? Hotel chain? Also a great example. So Citizen M, for those who do not know the hotel chain, they are almost entirely digitally enabled. So as a customer, I can do everything myself. I don't need to see anyone to check in or to wait like we had last night or many nights in these long check-in procedures. You can just do everything yourself from the app. Now what they've done is they catered to my intrinsic desire of autonomy. I wanted to feel empowered. That's why I choose Citizen M. I can do everything myself. I don't need to wait. I just can on my own terms. Now, secondly, and I think that's the genius part, they also identified that they connect on energy. You know that feeling when you go to a city where you've never been? It always brings some kind of adventure. It brings some kind of energy. And they've also implemented that in their digital experience. And I'm just going to show you a screen recording I made back in the days when I was at Citizen M. Just going to show you. So this is me checking in. Now, when you first see this, you might say, this is nice, right? A nice illustration, it's a bit of fun, it's a bit of games. But when you understand the fact that they're actively trying to create a brand memory, this makes total sense. They could have let you choose a room or a level from like just the lists. That would have been way easier. They did not have to make all these drawings or think about above the clouds or below the clouds. But they knew that by connecting to my intrinsic motivation of energy, I would remember this moment. And next time I would look for a hotel, Citizen M would be top of mind because they are actively creating brand memories. I'm going to skip this. Second part, be different. You also mentioned it in your previous, your keynote. Be remarkable, stand out. There is so many choices and brands. People can't remember anything. So dare to stand out, make sure that people remember you. Also going to use base here as an example. So I already mentioned that base, one of the values is control. One of the other values is simplicity. I hope you saw that in the experience I've shown you. And the third one is fairness. So base says we are a fair brand. And from fairness, they came up with a product feature. That means that if you have a base mobile subscription, you can have data jump. And data jump means that the data you don't use in January, you can still use in February, because base thinks that's fair. That's their promise. In Belgium, they're the only ones that do that, so it's something that differentiates them. It's a real USP. When I put on my functional hat and I get the briefing, I need to make sure that in the mobile app, people can see the data they have extra that month. So rather than showing the 10, there's 2.5 from last month, so I can show 12.5, and a small line said data jump carried over 2.5 gigabytes. Right? And I want to build the next feature because, I'm building the app, I want to create new features. If you look at this through the MX lens, you see a moment. You see a promise, you see a connection. What if we augment that moment and we just briefly celebrate it and remind you of the fact that you have extra data? It's not a lot of effort. Again, it's a bit of friction that we introduce, but it's 4 seconds. And it's again reminding people of what it feels like to be a base customer. And I think you all know that feeling when you get something new. Let's take a new phone, for example. The first week, it's a new phone. It's fun. It's something new. But after 3 months, you get used to it. Same thing with brands. Same thing with moments like this. So by actively augmenting this moment, you are shaping memories. And it's because of these two things that I've shown you, and a lot of other work we did for base, that base remains top of mind. And that even when there was a new telco player coming in Belgium, a lot of people switched because of the prices, but they came back. I think 70% came back to base. And the main reasons they came back is because they felt valued as a customer. And this is how you make your customers feel valued. You remind them of the fact that they're actually in a good place. You connect with them through meaning and through differentiation. And this is actually the way of thinking I wanted to share, is that traditionally when we build experiences, and you can do this digitally, but even in the physical world, they need to be functional. As a brand, you want your experience to be consistent across all your stores and touch points, and of course, it needs to be frictionless, because we're lazy as humans, right? So as frictionless as possible. Now, what I've seen happening in the world is that people got stuck at frictionless, because everything became a one-click single sign-on, one-click checkout. It needs to be frictionless, but there was no differentiation anymore. There was no connection, and sometimes I did not even remember on what website I was or in what app, because they all started looking the same. So we shifted that from this memorable thinking, from MX, thinking from the top to the bottom. How can we make it meaningful? How can we differentiate ourselves? And the rest can work for the two on top. That's how you create memories. Now, that does not mean that everything should be fun and games and long guided experiences or confetti. You should pick your moments. I really like this graph because I think a lot of people will recognize this, because it's typical for how we work. You have a CX line and you have your CX journey, which will never be perfect. There are ups, there are downs. And the typical reflex of people is, let's fix the things that are wrong. Let's make sure that we reach that baseline of customer experience. What I tell with MX is that don't forget to look at the things that are already good and augment them towards a new height. Make sure that they become the memory, because you will never fix every journey for everybody. But you can do the things that you're good, you can do them even better, you can make sure that these become memories. This is also what we have been doing for Le Pain Quotidien. We recently launched a new website, and we always refer to this website as the digital storefront because we took the same amount of craftsmanship thinking about this website than they do about their products or about their stores. So this is the digital storefront. And also Pain Quotidien has gone through these different cycles. From the 90s, where you just had like some addresses and phone numbers, towards more a content hub, towards more focused on e-com. And the question we asked ourselves was, what kind of website do we need now? But of course, in order to answer that question, we need to know who is Pain Quotidien and why are people choosing Pain Quotidien. I'm going to let Joost explain that for you.
I'm Joost. I'm the CMO of Pain Quotidien, and I'm going to try and give you in 2 minutes the brief that we gave Vincent in 2 hours. We're a Belgian chain of all the bakeries. The name of the company literally translated means the daily bread. We were founded 35 years ago, and this is our first location. Meanwhile, we're in 23 countries, 237 stores, without any employees or any customers. We don't have employees. We call them hosts. If you work in our kitchens, if you serve our people, if you make the coffees, we consider you a host. And the customers that we have, they're not consumers, customers, users. We consider them our guests. And of course, that's only words, but it's very meaningful. It's as meaningful to me in marketing that I'm not in the business of building data lakes, getting AI to do my marketing automation, not even in the business of selling croissants. I'm in the business of hosting. And so for us, that gives an idea. We're founded by a guy called Alain. Alain had his own restaurant in Brussels, not a bakery, a restaurant, and he wanted to serve bread. Could not find the bread he wanted. And so started looking everywhere, within driving distance from Brussels. I couldn't find the bread that was answering all of his needs, all of his wishes, and had no other choice but to make it himself. That's the origin, or that's our reason why we exist. The middle image is an image of a digital twin that November 5 created for us. So we've got our own digital twin of the founder, who's actually evaluating ideas and recipes and for all of our guys around the world. But that's not part of today's story. What I wanted to show you is, this is an article published in the Financieel Dagblad, the Financial Times of the Netherlands. And literally translated, it says, the guy may know a thing or two about bread, but for sure he's got no idea of doing business. What they were referring to was the series of irrational, non-economically sound choices this company is built on. The goal was never to make profit. The goal wasn't even to start a company, let alone a brand, or to make it go global. Alain sees this as a big problem. Success is a big problem. The goal was not to be big, the goal was to be great. And so That was our briefing. And that translates a little bit into things like this, right? The bread is made out of 3 ingredients: flour, water, and salt. Whereas 98% of the bread sold in the world contain more chemicals than the Americans have dropped in Iraq. And the World Health Organization has now labeled the consumption of ultra-processed food as the biggest cause of disease and death on the planet. And this is what our company stands for. And these are choices that we're making, and of course they come with all kinds of problems and difficulties and complications. One of them is that if you don't have chemicals, if you can only play with time and temperature, it takes a lot more time. And looking outside in at this company is financially is crazy. To not, as the bean counters call it, optimize the process. When the company was 5 years old, our founder entered the CEO's office with a bottle of Coke, and we were selling about 3 and a bit million Cokes a year at the time. And so the message was, je n'en veux plus. I don't want this anymore. It's bad for people's health. We're going to stop selling this. Another of these fantastically irrational choices. And get yourself a bottle of orange juice from the supermarket and leave it in your fridge for 2 weeks, nothing will happen. And we'd rather go and explain to our customers that, yeah, of course, when our bottles sit in the fridge for like half a day, you start seeing this. But what you're seeing is actually the result of there's fruit in it. And I can go on. And the same thing here. Maybe a last one of these choices is the original Pain Quotidien only had 1 table. And the first review of the bakery said, like, it's crazy, it'll never work. And then, of course, the miracle happened, and we saw that priests and punks and bankers and tourists and locals and old and young all share that table. And the French word for, no, the English word for friend is copain. Someone that you share bread with. And multiple friends is company and so on. You'll find this table in all of our places. It's the table in the room with the lowest profitability, with the lowest revenue. But we're not going to throw it out. We're not going to throw it out because for us it's so much more than a table, it's a symbol. It's a symbol to a life that seems to get lost as we in the busy city centers, looking at our phone, hurry from A to B, don't talk to strangers anymore, don't sit down for lunch and consume our food more and more on the go. This for us is a place where you can take back time from time, where you can take a breath, take a pause, share a table, maybe talk, maybe not talk to strangers, but where you can enjoy simple food, unprocessed, that's served to you by honest people. And so the brief to Vincent was, we don't want visibility. Don't drive traffic. We don't want e-commerce. But we'd like you to help us to tell our story better and make it more meaningful.
I always love listening to the story again. So, we did what we did best. If you listen to the story of Joost, there are two things from this intrinsic motivation that pop out. One is the belonging part, the communal table. People can relate to Le Pain Quotidien. They want to enjoy that the warmth of being surrounded with other people. And the second one is really rooted in these irrational choices. It's self-consistency. It's about being true to yourself. You make certain choices in life and you see a brand that makes the same choices, you can connect with that brand. Secondly, what differentiates Le Pain Quotidien? I guess you've heard that. There are so many stories to tell, and there's so many stories around the bread. It actually originated all with the bread because that was what provided the direction. That was the simplicity that went in all the things that Le Pain Quotidien started doing. And then lastly, of course, what Joost already mentioned also was the aspect of time. That is something that we should do something with because that's what makes us unique. And I'm going to let Alain briefly explain a bit the concepts while showing some.
This is not just bread. This is our philosophy. It's about time. Time for slowing down, time for connections, enjoying simple pleasures, because it's about time.
I'm briefly going to show you some highlights of the website and the choices we've made. Let's start with a real obvious thing that any restaurants would probably need. That's the menu page. A lot of people today don't even make it to our website when they are choosing for Le Pain Quotidien because Google My Business also allows us to show a lot of the things that we have. So if they do enter our website, our idea was, what if the menu could really, like you could almost taste the food. So really use high resolution imagery, big images that you just want to eat the dishes. And secondly, and most importantly, we want to tell our story. So even when people visit our menu page or land on our menu page, we always want to tie back to our story because we know that when people hear the story, they can connect and they're more likely to come to Le Pain Quotidien not once, but more than once. So this is how we integrated that in the menu page. We did not, although we want to tell a story, there's no about page. But some of you might have noticed the second one. It's the atelier. And just by reading the word atelier, we already wanted to provoke the idea of the fact that this is about craftsmanship. And rather than building an about page, we created an atelier page with images and the story of how Le Pain Quotidien still makes their bread today as they did 35 years ago, but now at scale. And I've actually seen it happen. We've been to the bakery, and it's really nice to talk to the people that have the passion for the product. So we wanted to share that story because for us it's a metaphor again for our self-consistency. And lastly, I bet you would not imagine this as the homepage of any restaurant's website, right? This is just a bread. And with the bread comes that poem that you've heard from Alain. This is what we want people to read. So we introduced a lot of friction. We did not show the seasonal dish or any promo up front or e-commerce. No, our goal was to tell that story and fascinate people and stand out, because that's not what you would expect from a website. So by doing this, we have been playing what I've shown you before. We've both set the expectation of the experience, but actually we already used, as we call it, the digital storefront, a moment to feed these brand memories. And I'm gonna just use one end slide, because for me this is what it all boils down to. If you practice a mix, you as a brand, you want to be a preference. You don't want to be a choice. And why is that relevant specifically today? Is we see a whole range of new generations coming that are less loyal to brands. They're switching more easily. And secondly, there are way more brands than back in the days. When I look up a sweater or I see a sweater on Instagram and I click on it, suddenly I have 20 alternatives all presented to me. There's an overload of choice. And lastly, maybe these couple of years are the last chances for us to create brand memories, because the shopping behavior of people will change. And I will ask my AI agent to buy me stuff. And if I just ask, let's say, I want a new TV, suggest me a new TV, I'm not including a brand. And what you want as a brand is that the people looking for products mention your brand. And they do that because they have positive memories. That's it.
Thank you very much, Vincent and Joost.